You've turned my mourning into dancing just felt like such a statement of like, God is in this next thing. Like your mourning from your past church experience will be transformed into dancing. And I love that, how embodied that is. The idea that no, I don't think in our regular everyday lives, we would conceive of those two things as opposites. When we think of easy opposites, black and white, love and hate, fast and slow, we don't think of mourning and dancing as like natural opposites, but it is so scriptural. It's so biblical. It's so psalmic, right? Because think of how your body is when you are in mourning, and think about how your body is when you're dancing. I mean, it is literally from the inside out, this spiritual and embodied posture that are complete opposites. I just love that imagery.
You have turned my sorrow to dancing and song. You've taken my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, so my soul may praise you. Be silent no more, my Lord and my God, I'll give thanks.
Welcome to Psalms for the Spirit, a podcast about spirituality and resilience through the lens of the biblical Psalms. Since 2013, I've been singing psalms set to traditional Irish and Scottish melodies with my dear friends, the McGraths. And in 2020, I started this podcast to explore the connection between resilience and spirituality as it's expressed in the poetry and music of the Psalms. Since I'd heard over and over again how the Psalms lift the spirit and give hope through difficult times, I've loved this exploration so much that I'm making a few changes, which I'll let you know about soon. And whatever it is that brought you here, I'm so glad you're with us.
Praise you, be silent no more, my Lord and my God, I'll give thanks evermore. Sing praise to the Lord, O you faithful.
All right, Julie, welcome to Psalms for the Spirit. I am so glad that you are here to talk with me on the podcast today. You and I we've just caught up, but we haven't seen each other in about a year and a half, but lots has happened since then. It's been a big time in your life. And yeah, a lot can happen in a year and a half. But I would love for you to just tell us a bit about yourself as we start this podcast, and just so that people have a sense of who you are as a person, as a professional, and any way that you want to describe yourself. And then we want to hear more about your story.
Okay. It's really good to be with you, Kieran. Thanks for having me. I have to confess, I did listen to a good chunk of the podcast you did with our mutual friend, Heather Prince Dawes.
Oh, yes.
And, I like the way she tried to introduce herself, not by just like what I do, but just some fun facts.
Yeah.
So maybe riffing off of that a little bit.
Go for it.
I am an INFJ on the Myers-Briggs.
Oh, you are. Okay. Yes.
INFJ. I think it's only like 1.5 or 2% of the population
Ooh, you're rare.
We are such a weird unicorn.
You're so rare.
I do not know my Enneagram type. That felt like just too much to wrap my head around. But everybody is obsessed with the Enneagram. I feel like I've just got to bite the bullet at some point soon.
Yeah.
I like to say I'm Philly by birth, but New York by mirth. I was born and raised outside of Philadelphia, actually like way outside. I was like in farmland. It was an area that was really rural, but now is like totally suburban. All the farms have sold and they're all housing developed. It looks very different. But my parents owned a greenhouse. I really grew up in the dirt.
Wow.
And it was kind of fun. But I have lived in New York now for most of my adult life. So a long time. And it'll be 20 years next year. And I love it here. The city really got me. So I grew up in the dirt, but I love the messiness of the city. And I always say I went from the cheesesteak to the cheesecake. And I am an ethnic Armenian. That is a really sort of central part of my identity. The genocide survivors in my family were still alive when I was young, and just grew up with those stories and just the priority on just maintaining your culture and your identity. So just very bicultural, bilingual upbringing. And I'm, very proud of my Armenian heritage. I am a person who believes that a good chocolate chip cookie is chewy and nut free. which I've come to understand is a subject of great controversy.
Is it? Some people love their nuts. Other people believe, and it's not because you have a nut allergy. It's because you don't believe that they should have nuts in them. Is that right?
I don't think chocolate chip cookies should be crunchy in any way.
Unless it's on a chocolate chip.
Yeah. But they're not crunchy the way nuts are. Anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
And I would say, there's a lot I could say, but so you touched on this. Most recently, I'm a cancer survivor. And that has profoundly shaped just my world in ways I never wanted, and ways that are continuing to unfold, but actually in ways that, it sounds a little cliche, but there have been some great gifts in it. It has sucked, but it's also been profound in a lot of ways, and ballet has been a part of that. So we'll talk about that.
Wow. Thank you for giving us a glimpse into who you are. And there's so much that can be said, but I think we actually got a lot out of that. That was, that covered a whole lot from.
I feel like I should also mention, I began my career in arts education. I was in music and dance teacher, but I'm now an Episcopal priest.
Yeah. There's that too. And you are a great singer too. So yes, when you attended one of the retreats that I led, it was just so nice to have somebody who had so many songs just ready to bubble up and getting people singing in parts. And it was so inspiring, just that way that, because you were a music teacher for a while, you know how to teach people to sing in different harmony parts, which is such a great skill. And it just gets people, it empowers people to sing in a whole different way when they can actually sing in different parts. Yeah. So that's something I really remember about our time on that particular retreat and getting an insight into who you are. And so I'm looking forward to being able to talk with you a bit more on this podcast and to find out a bit more about your life story and about especially your work with dance. And I thought of asking you to talk about dance as, I have an interest in movement as a spiritual practice. It's not really something that I have a huge background in, but except other than the fact that I talk all the time in my kind of writing and spiritual life about walking and pilgrimage and that type of movement. But for you, it's this beautiful, graceful movement that comes through your background in ballet. And I've really been interested in your work in your organization or company, or what do you call it? Faith on Point, whatever. What is it?
I call it a ministry.
It's a ministry. Sure.
I don't call it an organization. I suppose it ought to be at some point, but
someday it'll get there.
It's a passion project.
Yeah. We'll hear more about that. But because the Psalms talk about dancing a lot, it just seems like how often do we actually really recognize and talk about the fact that dance was a huge part of an expression of prayer in the time that the Psalms were written. And there are stories of people in that time period expressing their prayers through dance with the tambourine and, celebration. And, we don't do a whole lot of it, at least in my tradition and many of the kind of mainline Christian traditions. We don't do that as a regular part of our spiritual practice. So I think you will be able to talk with us about that and maybe rekindle an interest in expressing ourselves in that way, but also maybe even just appreciating people who can do that and seeing it as kind of a form of prayer. Anyway, so let's continue. I was wondering if there's a psalm that resonates with you particularly. Is there a psalm that you really like to turn to, or that maybe you feel kind of resonates with your life story?
Several, and different ones in different points of my life. Probably the most resonant right now is Psalm 6, which is everything is terrible, God. It could not be worse. I drown my bed in tears. And, it's so poetic in how despairing it is. And then it's but you are God who is, I can't quote it, but you are faithful and you're not going to abandon me. There's this despite how terrible everything is around you and in your life, that there is this stubborn hope. And hope against hope, that in God and in somehow God being faithful through what feels impossible, And that has really resonated with me, especially going through a cancer diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one that has been really meaningful to me for a long time is Psalm 30, particularly the phrase, "You have turned my mourning into dancing."
I was thinking about that one.
Yeah. And I will actually, our mutual friend, Heather, gave me that Psalm. She knew I was going in there was a big decision that I was facing, and I was going in for like a job interview or whatever the big decision was that I had to make. And she said, as you go into this meeting where you're going to make a big decision, here's the Psalm that I come up with for you. And I don't know how purposeful it was, but as I read it on my way, like that phrase was like, oh my gosh, because it was a job interview for actually the church that I'm at now. And it was a big decision. Am I going to take this job or not? And it felt like a right place, but I was just doubting because I was coming out of a really like abusive church experience, and it kind of shakes your radar a bit.
Yeah.
And just, "You've turned my mourning into dancing," just felt like such a statement of like, God is in this next thing. Like your mourning from your past church experience will be transformed into dancing. And I love that, how embodied that is. The idea that no, I don't think in our regular everyday lives, we would conceive of those two things as opposites. When we think of easy opposites, black and white, love and hate, fast and slow, we don't think of mourning and dancing as like natural opposites, but it is so scriptural. It's so biblical. It's so psalmic, right?
Yes.
Because think of how your body is when you are in mourning, and think about how your body is when you're dancing. I mean, it is literally from the inside out, this spiritual and embodied posture that are complete opposites. I just love that imagery.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, is dancing a way that you can express, a wide range of emotions? I mean, you've been through a lot in the past couple of years, and like, was dancing something that did your body not want to dance during those times? Or did you find that that was something cathartic that you could do? Or did you just not feel that energy toward it?
There were a lot of times when I just did not want to dance. When I was mourning, in the aftermath of getting that diagnosis, I was like not catatonic, but I was so paralyzed with fear and grief. And like, it was just like my whole body collapsed inward. And when you're carrying such a heavy heart, just your whole body drags. I had dark nights of the soul, and I didn't want to dance. And when I was recovering from surgery, especially, I knew that I needed to move. I had major surgery. There were like very limited movements I was allowed to do for, 6 to 8 weeks. And so actually ballet was like one of the few things I could do.
Really?
And so it was not intensively, like very gentle bar, some pliés, some port de bras, because the port de bras, which is movement of the arms, was very much, I had breast cancer. So it was breast surgery. So it was my whole upper body was like traumatized. So, what the surgeons are worried about is like getting your range of motion back and making sure that you heal well. And so just having all of the ability to do arm movements in ways that weren't just annoying physical therapy exercises, but were beautiful and creative and a part of an expression that was already meaningful to me, actually was like really healing and helpful.
Yeah. So it was really tied with your recovery in some ways. So you experienced the opposite, the mourning and dancing, when you were in deep grief and mourning. You didn't even feel like dancing, which is probably unlike you. So it was you, kind of zapped of all that energy and that desire that you have to dance. And then as you began to recover, and then you began to be able to move out of it, it sounds like movement and dance, specifically dance for you, was really tied with your recovery and your healing.
It was. I mean, and there's a lot you asked about, dance in general as a spiritual practice. And I kind of have a lot to say about it because I do have a lot to say about it. People often, when I talk about my ministry, Faith on Point, people generally immediately jump to liturgical dance or praise dance. I want to actually distinguish between, like, there are different ways that dance is a spiritual expression and a spiritual practice. And there are, especially in like the more evangelical churches, it doesn't exist as much in the mainline church, but there are praise dance teams. Like, dance as part of worship is does exist in certain parts of Christendom, but it is dance, not usually ballet, but it's sort of contemporary dance it's in the context of worship, that is maybe using dance to express whatever the scripture reading was. And that is actually not what I do, because that is also, I don't like to say it's a performance, but if you're the dancer, you're doing it in front of people in worship. So you're bringing your gifts, just like a soloist in the choir is singing, it's a dancer, right?
Yeah.
And that is a really lovely thing. And it's not what I do. So what I do is like just ballet as your own personal spiritual practice. This is not like learning choreography to perform. It's not done in the context of worship. It's done in the home. I mean, ideally one day, maybe it could be done in a studio or somewhere in a church hall together. Right now, everything has been online, and it will continue to be online. But this is using the language and the vocabulary of ballet, which, by the way, has some Jesuit origins. And I want to talk about that more. So you're using your dancing body as an epistemological instrument, that this is by dancing, our bodies are helping us know God and know ourselves a little better. So yeah, I wanted to distinguish that because they're both lovely, and one is what I do and one is not what I do.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, because that's what I am looking for, is some guidance on kind of using dance as an expression in personal prayer. And, when nobody is looking, and, you can dance in the kitchen, you can dance in your bedroom, you can dance in the living room. You're listening to Psalms for the Spirit, and I'm your host, Kieran Young Wimberly. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, I shouldn't be this tired. I'm doing work I love, so why do I feel so worn out? If that feels familiar, you're not alone. This is exactly why I created Resilient Spirit. I want to support people who spend their lives caring for others, clergy, community leaders, compassionate caregivers, those who rarely have a space to care for themselves. The Resilient Spirit offerings help you slow down, strengthen your inner resilience, and reconnect with what truly sustains you. It'll help you understand your stress responses, build daily spiritual practices that actually nourish you, and find rhythms that help you flourish. And you don't have to do it alone. You'll have community, courses, and the option of one-to-one sessions. If you're ready to feel more grounded, connected, and replenished in your everyday life, I would love to welcome you in. Visit KieranYoungWimberly.com/resilientspirit to learn more and join us. Julie, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about Faith on Point, and anything about movement as a spiritual practice as you want to share it with us, as it has to do with an expression of prayer.
Yeah. So Faith on Point was like many, many years in the making, I would say. And then it kind of all made sense when the pandemic hit. I don't know why that timing happened, but that's how the timing was. But I have to learn how to tell the story concisely. I'm still not good at that yet. But when I moved to New York, I fell into a job teaching adult beginner ballet. It was not something I thought I would do. It just was, it ended up being the most fun I've ever had in my life. It was the most fun job I've ever had. I mean, sorry, Jesus, I love being a priest, but that was like the most fun I've ever had. It was pure joy. What I sort of came as a pleasant surprise to me, I was not a priest yet. I was still in my teaching days. As I was teaching, though, I was still a pretty spiritual, religious person. I noticed that the language that I was using to describe how ballet feels in the body, because when you teach dance, it's all metaphor. You have to imagine, think of all sorts of different imagery of how one might imagine that might get felt and then moved, right, in the body. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the language I was using was spiritual in nature. And there was one day in particular, I'll never forget. And if you are part of the Western, especially mainline church, this phrase will be very familiar to you. I was teaching how to do an arabesque, and I was just using all the wrong language until I just sort of said, okay, lift up your hearts. And I watched the whole class just lift in the right way. And because when you're the teacher, you're in the front of the class and you're looking into the mirror, you can see everybody behind you. Yes. And I just watched this, like all this lift, just it from the right place. And that was like one moment, but it was a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, this liturgical language just spilled out of my mouth. And that's exactly how I feel when I dance. And then like I would notice that was happening a lot. And I was like, and just I feel like my soul sings when I get to dance. I love how it feels. I started ballet when I was 3 years old. So it's very much a language that lives in my bones.
It's fluent. You're fluent in dance.
Yeah, a little less fluent than I used to be. My body's a lot older now, but a lot of injuries and a lot of trauma to the body. But I still dance and I still love it. And anyway, and so that started me on this journey of like, ballet feels like so much more than a physical thing. This feels so deeply spiritual. Fast forward to, I was ordained. I found little in bits and pieces, like did a sermon series on it. I taught a community class at my church. And then I learned that there was also, in addition to ballet originating or finding its origins really in the French courts, there was also concurrently growth and origination of ballet in the Jesuit colleges in Paris, in France. So King Louis XIV, he was known to be the one who really like helped codify ballet. He himself was a dancer and was a huge supporter of the arts. But Pierre Beauchamp, who created the 5-foot positions, the 5 positions that are fundamental to ballet, a lot of these ballet fundamentals actually came out of Pierre Beauchamp taught in the Jesuit college. And that's where it came out of. And he went from the college to the court. And so there's a researcher named Judith Rock who wrote her dissertation on this. And there are a few other researchers who have written about this. And I was like, that was the light bulb moment for me, because my spiritual directors have always been Ignatian. And so knowing that like, I'm deeply formed by Ignatius and Ignatian spirituality. And just knowing that ballet had origins in the Jesuit college was like, yes, this is why it feels so deeply spiritual. Because in the Jesuit college, it wasn't the dance form that we know today. Obviously, ballet has evolved a lot. But at its foundation, in the Jesuit colleges, the ballets, they were like end of term performances that were for the purpose of like showing what you've learned. It was a way of, rather than writing a term paper, you danced with your body, all these lessons in philosophy and rhetoric that you'd been learning. So there was like, the way ballet was formed for the body was for, in some ways, the purpose of engaging in spiritual formation. And wow. I know. I was like,
it's incredible. That's incredible. That's pretty, it is pretty mind blowing. I never would have guessed that, that connection. Yeah. And I'm also very formed by Ignatian spirituality, but that is a connection I just never knew about and never would have dreamed of, to be honest. It's fascinating that it's sort of like something that has its origins in spirituality, then, you know, it just has that automatic connection to expression in that way, even if it has changed and evolved and it's understood maybe in a very different way now. So tell me what you do with Faith on Point at this point in time. Point. Point with an E, point without an E.
Yeah. So Faith on Point is ballet as a spiritual practice. So there is a 6-week signature course that I developed that really does a deep dive into like the ballet and the theology and what the common touch points are between those two disciplines. That has been on hold since the cancer diagnosis. And, you know, once my energy comes back, I hope to return to offering that. But Faith on Point also has an ongoing weekly community. It's a 1-hour ballet class. We're done for the year of 2025. We're getting into holiday season, and most of the people who come are religious professionals in some way, shape, or form. And it's just, no one has time for this in December.
Right.
But starting again in January, it's either a Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern time or Fridays at noon Eastern time. So hopefully a time that can work for most people, one of those two times. It's a 1-hour ballet class, but it is not like in first and foremost about the technique.
Yes.
It is secondarily about the technique, but it's about how the technique reveals spiritual lessons to us, right? So this most recent month, I have a different theme every month. So in November, this month, it was opposition. And so there is a ton you can talk about with opposition in the body when you're dancing, but it's not just about like, how are you doing this? How are you embodying this technique? It's about, as you're doing this, what do you notice is coming up for you? And so in a lot of ways, what I try to teach, I teach this more intentionally in the 6-week course, but I also just tend to ask, what comes up in your body? That love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind and strength. Use that fourfold paradigm to reflect. when you dance, what do you notice that's happening in your body? What do you notice that's happening in your mind? What do you notice that's happening in your heart? What do you notice that's happening in your spirit? Mm-hmm. When we dance, a lot happens. Like I notice in my body, oh man, my ankle's cracking again. Or, oh, I have a little twinge in my back. As we get older, that's the things that I notice more and more in my body. Or I might notice, oh my gosh, my arm just feels so light in this port-a-bras. What do you notice in your body? Oh, wow, it just clicked for me today that if I really like engage my rotators, my susu actually is stronger. What are you noticing in your body? And then what happens in your mind? Any dancer will tell you, the mind is in overdrive when you're dancing. You're always judging yourself. You're always overthinking the steps. If you have forgotten a step, you can be critical of yourself. Sometimes if you land something successfully, you're like, oh, look at me today. And what are the thoughts that go through your mind? What are the emotions that come up for you? And that is deeply Ignatian, right? If you're doing the daily examine, you're saying, what are the emotions that come up for me in this? And so where am I finding love in this practice? For me, ballet is a place where I can love myself the easiest. Maybe that sounds weird, but for me, it's such a heart-centered, embodied practice. The discipline of ballet, the art form of ballet emanates from the heart. It really does. And so what's happening in my heart as I'm dancing, and then in my spirit. So if I'm talking about ballet as a spiritual practice, those are the things I'm trying to highlight as we're dancing. And in every little bar exercise we do, when we come to the center, we usually do a physio divina. At the end of class, there's always a phrase that I teach that we do repeatedly. And then as at the very end, we just sort of have a moment to reflect on it. And how does it feel? And what did we notice? And that's really what Faith on Point is doing right now, is these 1 hour a week classes where it's a community too. Where we gather to dance in a way that connects us to ourselves, each other, and the divine. Wow,
that sounds amazing. I am not a dancer. As you know, I love music, but I'm just not a dancer. And I used to like just kind of expressing myself through fun dancing when I was, a teenager. But I've never studied dance and I don't feel confident in that way. But I love the idea of you offering a class online that meets people in their own comfort zones and safe spaces, and even possibly like turn off their cameras or whatever and just not be seen by anybody, but to do the movements and to notice what's going on inside of you as you do those movements. I think that's just got to be so therapeutic and just incredible. Maybe I'll need to step in on one of those classes, but turn my camera off.
You're welcome to. I always tell people to do what they're comfortable with. What's interesting is the people who are impacted by this the most are people who have formerly danced professionally and are suddenly in a space where they're not judged for how they're dancing. And they're the folks that struggle with it the most and then benefit from it the most. Yeah, I can imagine. There's a lot to unlearn there. And yet it's got to be a really cathartic experience for them. Well, that's wonderful to hear. And people can find you on Faith on Point, and your information will be available in the show notes of this episode. So I'm sure that there will be people who will be looking to you for some guidance on how to do ballet as a spiritual practice. And that is so wonderful. As we close today, Julie, I was wondering if you would share with us something that you have found healing and hopeful in recent times, something psalmic in your life. What comes to mind for you? I'll actually just tell the story of what happened a few days ago. I was coming out of the subway, and as I was exiting the platform, I noticed two plainclothes officers pull aside a young Latino man. And if anybody has been paying attention to what's happening in the US, there has been pretty significant targeting of brown folks in particular. Anyone who seems to be Latino, I think, is very scared right now, can easily get disappeared. So I just watched them take this man aside and said, "Sir, can you step over here for a moment?" I couldn't tell he had done anything wrong except exist while being brown. And so I just stood there and watched. I got my camera out. I took photos, I took some video, and I was sort of like in the way of people exiting the turnstiles. And so as folks were exiting, noticing me looking in a direction that one wouldn't normally be looking in, a couple of people stopped and joined me. And they were like, "Is that ice?" I said, "I'm not sure. I can't quite tell." One of them has a badge, but they're not identified in any way. They were talking to the young man. They were taking his phone. They were, it wasn't quite clear what was happening, but it didn't seem super above board. And just what was healing and hopeful was strangers joining me in standing in solidarity and witness and opposition to what was happening to this young man, and ready to spring into action if he needed his rights protected. It feels in a lot of ways dark and hopeless in the US a lot of the time. But boy, that gave me so much hope that there were perfect strangers. And we just we were instantly like, oh yeah, like we were locked in. We were not going to go until we knew this young man was safe. Thankfully, they wrote him a ticket and then sent him on his way. And it became clear later they were transit police. So I don't know if he littered or jumped a turnstile or something very minor, but he was okay. But just
that's good to hear.
Yes. I was like, sorry, I should have led with that. But that gave me so much hope. And it was a very healing moment. And it was actually so in line with the theme of opposition that I'd been focusing on in my November classes, that the opposition in ballet, in the body, creates harmony in the movement and creates beauty in the movement. And to find that harmony and that beauty in the opposition was just a really psalmic moment.
Yeah, I can see that. In that moment of fear and concern, you then were met with this opposite of the care and the community coming together to make sure that this young man was safe, and the goodness of humanity in opposition to at least what you were concerned it might be. Thankfully, it didn't turn out to be that. But yeah, I can really see how that would have been a moment of real healing. And thank goodness there are good people in the world. There are lots of them. And it's a good reminder of that. A moment like that, you really hang on to that for hope. Yeah. Thank you so much, Julie. Thanks for taking us through that discussion on not only dance as a spiritual practice, but also how those opposing elements can create some sort of harmony together. And if we go back to the idea of the mourning and the dancing, that although when you were mourning, you didn't feel like dancing, that your journey back to your full recovered self involved having that energy, slowly finding that energy to dance again and that desire to dance. So I'm really glad that you are where you are now and you're able to share your gift of dance with the world, and that there are people who can benefit from what you've experienced, and that you can help people through that journey in a very special way. So thank you so much, Julie, for being on
Karen.
Our podcast today.
Oh, such a joy to talk to you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
My sackcloth and clothe me with joy, so my soul may praise you. Be silent no more, my Lord and my God. I'll give thanks evermore. You have turned my sorrow to dancing and song. You've taken my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, so my soul may praise you. Be silent no more, my Lord and my God. I'll give thanks evermore.
You've been listening to Psalms for the Spirit with me, Kieran Young-Wimberly, with music by Celtic Psalms. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you would leave a 5-star review so that others can more easily find it. And if you know someone who might be inspired by this podcast, please do pass it on. And finally, make sure you sign up for my podcast email list so you never miss another episode. Until next time, may our spirits find healing and hope in the days ahead.